I'm Art Holliday, News Director at KSDK 5 on your side. February is Black History Month, and as a longtime reporter and anchor at KSDK, I had the opportunity to report on a variety of Black history topics during my 40-plus years in our newsroom. From the way DNA testing has made it easier for Black families to trace their roots, to a rhetorical question about who was more influential musically, rock and roll icon Chuck Berry or jazz legend Miles Davis. Before I share those two stories, multiple studies have found St. Louis to be one of the most segregated cities in the U.S., and there are historical reasons. Starting in the early 1900s, St. Louis was among cities which legalized racial zoning. It contributed to school segregation and restrictions on which housing Black people could purchase. The result was a landmark Supreme Court case, Shelley versus Kramer, which originated in St. Louis. In the 1940s, J.D. Shelley wanted the American dream in St. Louis.
He wanted a nice place for his family to live while he was here. There were 9 of them in the family.
In 1945, Shelley bought this house at 4600 Labadie Avenue in North St. Louis. Shelley didn't know there was a 1911 covenant barring Blacks from owning the property. To block the home sale, Louis Kramer, who lived blocks away, sued. According to author and filmmaker Jeffrey Copeland, Shelley's legal fight helped change the course of civil rights history via the U.S. Supreme Court.
Shelley versus Kramer was actually one of the more milestone rulings in the history of this country.
Prior to 1948, Blacks in St. Louis and the U.S. could rent property, but often couldn't buy a home because of racial covenants that prevented African Americans from buying in certain neighborhoods.
As of 1945 through 1948, when these events took place, people could be denied where they live because of their race, color, creed, national origin.
A plaque in front of the Shelley house details the multiple legal battles on the constitutionality of racially restrictive covenants, ultimately decided by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Mr. and Mrs. Shelley eventually do win in court. They win in St. Louis Civil Court, they lose at the Missouri Supreme Court, then they win at the United States Supreme Court.
The winning attorney in Shelley versus Kramer was the NAACP's Thurgood Marshall, who went on to become the first African-American Supreme Court justice. Copeland says Shelley versus Kramer inspired civil rights activists for decades to come.
Once Shelley versus Kramer was on the books, then people started looking at other injustices as well, and they weren't as afraid to get up and say, look, we see what they did in St. Louis. Now, you know what? It's our turn.
In 1949, a year after Shelley versus Kramer, an integrated public swimming pool was ground zero for a race riot in St. Louis. The Fairground Park pool was one of the largest pools in the Midwest, but open only to white swimmers. When the city of St. Louis decided to open the pool to Black swimmers, the situation escalated. Swimming pools are usually where you go to cool off. But on June 21, 1949, the heat was on the first day Blacks were allowed into municipal pools in St. Louis.
2 days before in Webster Groves, they opened this public swimming pool and denied Blacks admission. So a reporter asked Mr. O'Toole, who was the Commissioner of Parks and Recreation, are you going to allow Blacks to enter the swimming pools on opening day? And he said, well, they have a right to enter those pools just like anybody else.
1949 St. Louis, like much of the nation, was grappling with segregation and the growing civil rights movement. There were protests about white-only lunch counters, segregated schools, and department stores. Black kids just wanted to swim, and when 30 to 40 showed up at the Fairground Park pool,
there was no planning, there was no policy.
All hell broke loose. White youngsters outside the fence shouted threats and obscenities, the prelude to violence.
Thousands of white people gathered in the park, and there were only a handful of Black people. So you can imagine how terrifying that was.
News accounts indicate that it took over 400 police officers more than 12 hours to restore order after whites attacked Blacks in Fairground Park.
Not guns, but baseball bats, bricks, pipes, and they were attacking Blacks with these weapons that they had.
Less than 2 weeks later, Life magazine reported St. Louis's racial strife to the nation.
This event attracted national and international attention. It was the first race riot that was actually happened in St. Louis.
No one died in the riot, but the event shook St. Louis. The St. Louis mayor immediately resegregated all city pools. NAACP President Robert Witherspoon was among those who fought back. A year later, a federal judge ordered St. Louis swimming pools open to all. It was a pivotal moment in St. Louis's racial history.
We kind of ignored the racial problems that we had here in St. Louis. But with the Fairground Park race ride, you couldn't ignore it anymore.
St. Louis's music history is impressive. Whether it's ragtime, jazz, rock and roll, rhythm and blues, opera, or hip hop, St. Louis has produced superstar performers. In 1926, 2 babies were born in St. Louis and Alton, destined to become music immortals, Chuck Berry and Miles Davis. How's this for a great debate? Who was more influential, Miles Davis or Chuck Berry? It's one thing to have hit records. It's another thing to influence every generation that followed. Chuck Berry, Johnny Johnson rocked Maybelline. You Never Can Tell, Sweet Little 16. When Chuck Duck walked, teens understood Roll Over Beethoven and Johnny Be Good. Birth of the Cool became kind of blue. When Miles played his horn, it kept sounding new. Bebop to hard bop, fusion to hip hop. Miles had the key and jazz was unlocked. It's only the legends who get statues. Miles Davis and Chuck Berry have statues 26 miles apart in Alton and University City. Was one musician more influential than the other?
That's a hard question.
For a conversation about Davis and Berry, 2 members of the St. Louis Radio Hall of Fame. Webster University instructor Bernie Hayes, currently interim director of the National Blues Museum, and his friend Tom Papa Ray, owner of Vintage Vinyl, musician, radio host, DJ. 2 men who appreciate Berry and Davis.
Internationally famous.
Both a genius, each one.
Kind of Blue is the all-time top-selling jazz album.
Miles did not like to be called a jazz musician. He was just called a musician.
Besides Davis's ever-changing music styles, check out just a partial list of some of his band members. Miles University was attended by some of the greatest musicians ever.
They were geniuses, all of them, and he let them shine.
Classic rock began with Chuck Berry and his Hall of Fame sideman, Johnny Johnson. In the beginning, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were Chuck Berry cover bands on their way to legendary status. The early Stones did an entire album of Chuck Berry covers, while the Beatles frequently paid tribute to Berry in their live performances, covering Roll Over Beethoven, rock and roll music, Too Much Monkey Business, and Johnny Be Good.
Chuck Berry created the electric guitar as the lead instrument in rock and roll. He created the whole template and persona for a front man of a rock and roll band.
Chuck had more influence on the Caucasian or white market than he did on the African American market. His influence was a crossover influence.
Born just months apart in 1926, 2 music titans who grew up within 20 miles of each other. I'm wondering, did they ever meet? Do you all know? Did they ever meet? Did they ever cross paths?
I don't believe so.
I have no idea. I doubt it.
What would that conversation have been like?
They would have had a mutual respect as innovators. They'd had a mutual respect as being from the same city.
Who cast the larger shadow, Chuck Berry or Miles Davis?
Both created seismic waves that went far beyond St. Louis.
DNA testing has become a game changer for tracing family history, and that's especially true for black families who are often missing important information about their ancestry because of slavery's impact of breaking up black families. One of my favorite stories is about a St. Louis woman whose journey to learn about her family history started with a DNA kit and ended with a bus ride from Missouri to Tennessee.
It's a journey of discovery.
The Wood family reunion. It's a reunion that might not have happened if it hadn't been for a retirement gift. The gift, Carolyn Krager's Ancestry.com DNA testing kit, connected her to family members in Tennessee she didn't know. With DNA evidence pointing the way, Krager became a genealogy detective, fact by family fact.
And Georgia reached out to me and she said, I believe that your grandmother and my grandmother were sisters.
On day 1 of the Wood family reunion trip, 34 family members, many of them strangers, on a bus from St. Louis to Chattanooga.
We're excited about this family reunion.
Amen.
We ask you that you would bless those that are hosting us.
The journey began with a prayer, then an 8-hour bus ride to Tennessee. Plenty of time for introductions.
And I just found out
Tracy Heron traveled from California to St. Louis to learn more about her great-grandmother's family.
Being that she was the youngest of 18 kids, that there's a whole lot of us out there, and some of us don't even know each other.
We never expected to learn about our great-great-great-grandfather who was a slave.
Buried in a Georgetown, Tennessee cemetery is the former slave Wilson Wood, born around 1815 in Virginia, according to family records. His father was his owner, a white man named William Wilson Wood. His mother was a slave named Mary. They moved to Tennessee in 1838.
In doing our ancestry research, we discovered that there is information on Wilson Wood and Sarah Wood.
First stop for the Wood descendants, a Chattanooga park.
Hey, glad to be here.
The St. Louis Woods hugged the Tennessee Woods, who hugged the California Woods, meeting for the first time.
Thank you.
Like many reunions, hugs gave way to good food and storytelling. For St. Louisans Tawny Brown and her sister Kyla, a new appreciation for family history.
I think that it's just a privilege that many of us in the African American community don't get, to be able to trace our roots. We may make it back a couple of generations, but that usually isn't enough to tell our whole story.
To me, it's to have history, to have a better understanding, but it kind of makes it real to see the document.
It's day 2 of the Wood family reunion in Tennessee. This is the reunion t-shirt. Behind me, the Meigs County Courthouse, where the Wood family is about to see a remarkable document from America's slavery era.
Stored in a fireproof safe.
Meigs County Clerk Janie Myers is the person who found Wilson Wood's bill of sale and is about to share it with the Wood family.
I mean, it's a piece of history that I cannot wrap my mind around. A bill of sale for a person. It's just hard for me to even imagine. It's not just a piece of paper. These were people's lives that were taken from family.
Thank you, Wilson.
Thanks to courthouse documents from the 1800s, more than 100 descendants of William Wood connected in a way they never imagined. More than one touched the page, grasping the past.
I can feel the history just in the suffering. It's just giving me perspective. I just feel thankful that I can see this and know where I came from.
This is the deed of sale of him. Yeah, so this is where William Wood sold his son Wilson to Samuel, his uncle. We all recognize that if Wilson Wood had not lived, if Wilson Wood had not been a slave, that none of us would be here today.
Carolyn Krager marvels at the impact of her DNA kit, the retirement gift that keeps on giving.
And I'm getting ready to cry, but it's life-changing, and it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
We found out that we were cousins. I didn't even know that Carolyn existed. And I want to say to each of you, welcome home.
Art Holliday, 5 on your side.
I just can't put into words what this means.
February is Black History Month. Stay tuned to 5 on your side for programming to commemorate the occasion. I'm News Director Art Holliday, 5 on your side.